I love nostalgia and video games. I'm generally a very nostalgic person and often feel happy, sometimes slightly sad, when I think about the video games I grew up with. But nostalgia is starting to ruin video games, at least for me. Let me paint a picture. The year is 2019. Pokemon Sword and Shield just came out on the Nintendo Switch. Now, I've always been a Pokemon fan, but I hadn't played a main series Pokemon game since Generation 3 when I owned Pokemon Sapphire. As I got older, I focused more of my time and attention on the main console games instead of handhelds. And so with Sword and Shield on the Switch, I was ready to jump back into the Pokemon world. But the Pokemon world was far from what I was used to. Visually, sure, the Pokemon looked great. But I found the Pokemon in the Galar region very... There was no Pokemon I came across that I was genuinely excited to have on my team. And I felt like Cardi B in that one famous clip.
Oh my god, what is that? Oh my god! What is that?
Even the starters, the first 3 Pokemon you're introduced to in the game, felt underwhelming to me. I was also not a fan of the Dynamaxing gimmick. Like, why was that necessary? Overall, the new Pokemon and the story of Sword and Shield felt weak. But was it because the Pokemon in the story were actually bad? Or was it because I grew up with the original 151 Pokemon, having played Pokemon Red and Blue, Pokemon Puzzle, Pokemon Stadium, and Pokemon Snap, that I have an engraved nostalgic feeling associated with the first generation Pokemon? To me, the first generation Pokemon, as well as the second generation, will always be superior to me, because those are the Pokemon I grew up with. But I'm sure it'd be a different story if you asked someone whose first Pokemon game was Sword and Shield. But it's because of this nostalgic feeling that I didn't bother buying the most recent Pokemon game, Scarlet and Violet, because deep down, I knew I probably wouldn't enjoy it. And sure, how can I say that without actually having played the game? But games are not cheap these days. A new game costs around $90 Canadian, and based on the fact that I did not enjoy Pokemon Sword and Shield, and even Arceus, I wasn't willing to spend the money to take a chance on Pokemon Violet and Scarlet. And this feeling for me is not just limited to Pokemon. When The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild was released in 2017, I bought the game expecting another amazing Zelda game. But what I experienced was so far from the traditional Zelda game that I grew up with, that I couldn't force myself to play past Zora's Domain. I wanted to love the game so much that I tried replaying the game a few years later and got to the exact same spot, only to find myself uninterested to continue playing, and haven't played since. What I loved about Zelda was the temples, the puzzles, and discovering items that you keep with you on your journey. But instead, we got shrines, breakable items, and this open world that felt empty. Now, there's no denying Breath of the Wild is an amazing game, scoring a 97% on Metacritic. But because of my nostalgia for a traditional linear Zelda game, games like Majora's Mask, Twilight Princess, Wind Waker, and of course Ocarina of Time, games I grew up with, I just couldn't get into Breath of the Wild, no matter how much I tried. I'll also be the first to admit that my nostalgia has blinded me to the fact that some of the games I grew up with aren't that good. Like, as much as I love the Mario Party series, the first Mario Party game was very experimental. And if you go back and play it, you'll probably ask yourself, why did I want to do this? Just a reminder, you lose coins for losing mini games in this game. But despite the big flaws and the game being subjectively bad, I will always have a soft spot for the first Mario Party game, because I have fond memories playing the game with the neighbors I grew up with across the street. I personally can't say I have those fond memories with Mario Party 10. Now, before people go thinking, if they haven't already, that I'm some biased prick that thinks nothing will ever beat the traditional video games that I grew up with, I do want to say that that is not always the case. I absolutely love the Donkey Kong Country series for the Super Nintendo, but I also love Donkey Kong Country Returns for the Wii and Tropical Freeze for the Wii U, and I'm dying for a new Donkey Kong game. Obviously, yeah, the games are very similar in that they're all challenging 2D platformers, with amazing music I might add. But there's also big differences between the Super Nintendo games and the Wii and Wii U games that makes each game feel so different and unique. It's the same thing with Super Mario Odyssey. Each 3D Mario game is very unique from one another, especially Odyssey. But the core of each game remains the same, and that's why I've continued to love each 3D Mario game. And listen, I recognize this feeling of nostalgia is probably exclusive to older fans. I myself am in my early 30s, and I was there for the NES days. So there are a lot of video games I grew up with that I have nostalgia for. Specifically games on the 64, GameCube, and Wii. The The games on those systems encompass my childhood and early teen years. And most of the time on this channel, we're making videos on these older Nintendo video games. I mean, we have a whole series dedicated to Banjo-Kazooie. And so it's no surprise to me that most of our viewers are aged 25 to 34. And I think Nintendo recognizes this nostalgia feeling amongst the older fans, since they continue to remake and remaster games these fans grew up with in the 90s and early 2000s. Over the last few years, I've become much more likely to buy these remastered games, like Metroid Prime, Super Mario 3D All-Stars, or Mario Party Superstars, since I have such good memories associated with these games when they first came out. Versus new games like Scarlet and Violet and Tears of Kingdom, which I don't plan on buying. I'm not saying that I don't want new games, or that each new game that comes out sucks. It's just I've recognized this feeling of nostalgia for the video games I grew up with is potentially ruining new video games for me. I do want to see more completely new games, and I want to see new games of the series I love. You know, just preferably when the core of those games aren't completely changed from the games I grew up with. And hey, I recognize this is a me problem, but I want to discuss this feeling and see if other people could relate to it. Hope you enjoyed this video, and let us know your thoughts down in the comments below. Until the next video, keep pressing it.